welcome to Legally Speaking. With me, Tarun Nangia. Judicial infrastructure in India is an afterthought. It is ad hoc and unplanned. These words were used by Chief Justice of India, Justice N.V. Ramana, not one but many times when he was saying that he's indeed not happy the way judicial infrastructure in this country is built also. And I'll also take you back that he also sent a proposal to the government of India, the union government, and which said that a national judicial infrastructure authority should be set up. So there is a proper authority which plans judicial infrastructure and which implements so that we can have world-class courts and infrastructure. Maybe also remind my viewers that judges are the administrative head of courts. And that is why many times when files are not planned, you can't get files in courts. There are a lot of problems. I recently read an article of Patna where, people were not finding files. It was very difficult for litigants. So then in a sense, judges have to take that responsibility. Should they take this responsibility? We will also discuss this. May I introduce my illustrious panel to you today. I will welcome Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. It's a pleasure to see you again on the show. I have Mohit Saraf on the show after some time. Recently, I read you are about 200 people strong. Many congratulations to you and Saraf and partners. Ryan Karanjawala, Managing Partner, Karanjawala and Company, one of India's leading litigation law firms, joins me on the show. Welcome, Mr. Karanjawala. And may I request Mr. Karanjawala in about a minute, if he could lay the ground, and then we can start the discussion.
So I think, Tarun, the time, I'll take about a minute or two just to introduce things. I think the time has come when all the lawyers and all the big firms and the smaller firms get together behind the Chief Justice's push and make what he is suggesting a crusade. Because there is absolutely no doubt that you cannot be a first world economy. You cannot be a first world country unless you have a first-rate judiciary. And you cannot have a first-rate judiciary if you're suffering from several infrastructure restraints. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that India is, because only a little over half of the court facilities have purified water. Only a little over one-fourth, a little over one-fourth of the court facilities do not have separate ladies' toilets. About 15% do not have even separate gents' toilets. So the fact of the matter is that infrastructure in the legal system is woefully lacking. And unless you really spend money, time, effort, and build it up, you're never going to have a situation where you match up to the infrastructure of the first world countries. Today, you are looking at an economy which you say will soon be $5 trillion worth. You want to, therefore, make it a world-class economy which gets foreign exchange from everywhere and which gets a lot of investment. Now, one of the pitfalls to getting a lot of investment into your country is the simple fact that if your legal infrastructure is not adequate, countries, companies, other people, investors hesitate to come with full gusto. So this is one thing that has to be done. And in fact, from the court's perspective, I would feel that the Chief Justice should constitute a panel of himself and every future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, so that one Chief Justice, when he retires, can hand over the baton to the next one, who is already completely familiar with the steps that have already been taken in order to ensure that the court's infrastructure is up to the mark. I think I just say that in the beginning, and then I leave it to the others to sort of fill out the details.
Thanks so much for that opening comment. Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi, you saw the opening comment made by Mr. Ryan Karanjawala. In about a minute, if you could make your opening comment, and then we take off on the discussion.
Infrastructure is all about building capacities. And building capacities has two elements, to my view. One is of domain experts who are there in the system. because they are as much as an infrastructure asset as the brick and mortar infrastructure is. So you have to have domain experts. Like, for instance, we have now seen this trend, and our Chief Justice commented on it, of certain jurisdictions coming back to the High Court. Call it judicial vapacy, if you would. That is IPR coming back to the High Court being a classic example. So you have to think of building and developing this domain expertise. I would even go to the extent of saying, consider something like having even judges of high courts on secondment to other high courts. So they bring with them their knowledge of some of the vibrant high courts. I can give an example of my parent high court, Delhi High Court, and the kind of litigation we have here. If our judges can be persuaded to go on secondment to other high courts, which may not be as fortunate in terms of litigation, it spreads that domain expertise. That is one area. Lawyers can go on secondment to high courts, etc. I remember Fali Nariman once said that he would not have minded then, this is about 20 years back, if he were given an ad hoc judgeship in a high court like Bangalore, and he would do it as part of social service. And of course, he would not appear there for the next 5 years because it really doesn't, in the long run, matter. So this is one area. The second area is, of course, the brick and mortar infrastructure. And there, Ryan is absolutely right that our capacities require a huge amount of beefing up. The figures are a little gloomy, whether it is toilets, whether it is creches, whether it is indeed courtrooms, whether it is courtrooms on rent, etc. And of course, the question of having adequate number of judges. With it is the concept of financial autonomy, that is budgeting. Now, it has been suggested to have, along the NALSA model, which is for legal aid, to have the NJIAI, that is National Judicial Infrastructure Authority of India, with its state branches, so that this aspect can be taken over from the usual, if I may use the expression, with all due respect, of Babudam approach of one particular segment in the government looking after this very important area. So I think all these, and lastly, my firm belief that every adversity is really an opportunity in disguise. So you've got these virtual hearings. Now, we have a very on-off approach on virtual hearings. If there's an emergency, let's have virtual hearings, then we won't look at virtual hearings. I don't think that's correct. You have to assimilate virtual hearings. The whole concept of growth of ideas, say, in the Hegelian dialect was thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you just can't have thesis and antithesis. You have your virtual hearing, integrate it with your regular hearing. There is a problem of hybrid hearing. Work it out so that once you have this virtual hearing, which is embedded as hybrid hearing, it'll help you with so many other issues of brick and mortar infrastructure. You would not necessarily, particularly for women lawyers, for so many others, elderly lawyers, for people who are not that well off, so they don't have the cars and other facilities. Those aspects would be taken care of, provided you have an effective, vibrant, hybrid hearing system in place, which doesn't put undue strain on the judicial system. So I think it requires a holistic approach, and I entirely agree with Ryan that you must have a system, say a G5 of sorts, where the present Chief Justice and the next four, because you know on seniority who would be the next four, who sit there, so the baton is passed on in a seamless sort of a way.
Thanks for that opening comment. Now we go to Mohit Saraf, Managing Partner, Saraf and Partners. We hear that he also submitted a report on this issue some time ago. So in a sort of a brief way, in about next 2.5 minutes, if you could share with us a few recommendations you made, as also for us to know that what can be done which actually revamps the infrastructure of courts in this country.
Thank you, Tarun. I think it's given that our quality of judicial infrastructure is very poor. And also, if it is given that enforceability of contract, we rank almost at the bottom in the world. And therefore, what it does really is, it helps people not respect law, not respect contract. Because if eventually you have to pay after 10 years, today it doesn't matter. You can breach it, and that is what. So really, the infrastructure has to be inviting, that people, if they go to court, they don't feel suffocated. they have the basic amenities. And these are, I think it's given. I think what is important is, I think what Justice Ramana did, he actually accepted the fact that there's a problem. I think that's on record, that everybody knows there is a problem. And then he suggested a mechanism to get there. And I think important thing here is that whether this mechanism is good enough, and I think recognition is a problem, is well understood. Anybody who goes to a court will know whether it's a case management system or is the infrastructure, everything is at the bottom. And if you see a lot of law firms in India, their structure, at least the infrastructure is very good. So I think the important thing here is, how do you fix that problem? I clearly agree. If you look at the central government support, and which are very small amount of money which the central government gives, but most of the money is unutilized. And I would say the same thing will happen if the present structure which the Chief Justice has suggested, which will have the Chief Justice and High Court judges as part of it. Because I think what we have to understand, and I think this is something which is a larger call, judiciary, judges have to understand they are very good in judicial functions. And administrative function, as you rightly said in your introductory remark, is not they are very good at. And therefore, it is a call that they need to remove the administrative function out. That is how, if you see the Malaysian courts, they have improved the entire case management system, the functioning. They have got a COO running the courts. The CEO runs under the direction and superintendence of a Chief Justice. But a CEO runs, a CTO runs, Chief Technical Officer, Chief Operating Officer. Same thing you have to do in the judicial infrastructure. If the body is run by judges, you will have 1,000 crore allocation, 200 crore will be used. It has to be run by professional people. There have to be a CEO, there has to be a COO, there have to be a CTO technology officer. It has to be run. If we are doing that, then we can fix the problem. Because remember, you have to pick up. Remember, judges and lawyers, they're very busy people. They have too much on their plate. Now, if they start doing this administrative work, then obviously the administrative work will always be the last. They should be giving the broad contours of direction, but not following it up. And I think, in my view, that is what needs to be done. As what you rightly said, that the administrative function, you said whether the judges are good at administrative function. And I would say that is a call which we need to do to get to a $5 trillion, as what Ryan said.
Okay, thanks for that opening comment. I'll go to Mr. Karanjawala. At this point, we'll take off from what the Chief Justice of India, Justice Ramana, said. He wants a National Judicial Infrastructure Corporation. By the virtue of the name itself, it suggests that this will be a corporation manned by professionals. Do you see that if this come into being, there will be a great leap in terms of modern day courtrooms? Do you think that this is that big idea that India needs today? And do you think it is easier said than done, because this has to be pushed by the government? A lot of money has to be allocated. And as we understand, the Chief Justice of India is for the whole country. So he would be speaking of courts in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Nagaland, in every state. It's not for the top 3-4 states in economic indicator. Do you think this would need thousands of crores? Because the reality is that there is not even power supply in many courts in rural areas. So this sort of needs a larger push.
It would certainly need a large amount of money. But considering the fact that the justice system is so important, and the judges are a third wing of the government, a third wing of the republic, there's no reason why the national expenditure on the judiciary and the judicial functionings and the judicial infrastructure should be at 0.1%, which it today is. There's absolutely no reason why you should spend so little money. Of course, any big national infrastructure push in a particular direction is certainly going to cost money. But just as the Prime Minister has floated a special fund, which is the PM Special Care, maybe the judiciary can float a fund which can be sort of CSR, contributed to charitable institutions, goes into a sort of a separate consolidated fund kind of thing, and then is utilized for the for judicial infrastructure. See, money has to be found. You can't get away by keeping on saying, no, we will spend only so much, we'll spend only so much. Judges will function at half strength. And then keep saying, but why are people not investing in India sufficiently? Because you will always have a situation where, see, what do people want from a justice delivery system? It should be efficient and it should be reasonable in cost. That is the two things they want. And that is something that you have to work towards. If money has to be spent, then money has to be spent. If money has to be found, money has to be found. And you just have to ensure that the government allocates much more towards the judicial system. And that's why I said in the beginning, this is something that perhaps, all of us should sort of put our shoulders behind the Chief Justice and the judges and sort of make it a bit of a regular crusade. See, over a period of time, where you noticed when lawyers and judges took up the issue that, look, the courts are not being manned at the full strength at which they should be manned. Slowly, over a period of time, Parag will recollect, Mohit will recollect. Now, slowly you find that lists are going for who should be appointed judges, who should, and slowly, it's being filled up. Equally, if you start making a push today, then I think realistically by the year 2030, you may really have a judicial system in place which can give a run to for its money to any system in the world. The target should be take the most efficient system in the world today. See how long a particular kind of case takes to go from A to Z. And then say that by the year 2030, we will do it in not more than 40% more time than that.
Okay.
You have to set a certain target and then try and meet it.
Before I take a break, I'll also remind you, Mr. Karanjawala, in one of the earlier shows, you had said that the courts can impose costs and also raise funds.
That's right. There are many ways to find money. You can impose costs at a normal level, and then that can all go towards the judicial infrastructure. You're right, Tarun. Thank you for reminding me.
That is what you said. I'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Just before the break, we had Mr. Karanjawala saying and reiterating his point that courts can impose costs in matters and also raise money for infrastructure fund. That could be one of the ways in which monies can be found by various states to fund in case there is lack of funds. I'll go to Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. Now, you got educated at Harvard and you've seen the infrastructure of courts in United States of America. You've been practicing here for the past 30 plus years. Do you think that this is what we have neglected, and you can see exasperation in the voice of the Chief Justice of India that we can have world-class software companies just a little away from Delhi in Gurgaon and Noida, where you have the best world-class infrastructure. Now, some government PSUs also like Indian Oil Corporation, BPCL have world-class infrastructure. You see their offices, they seem to be believed. But judiciary got neglected. Do you think that this is the big idea that the Chief Justice is taking? Because very few Chief Justices have been as vocal as Chief Justice of India, Justice N. Ramana today. Nobody has been as vocal.
Yes, I think upgrading the infrastructure in the judicial sector is an idea, the time of which had come at least a decade and a half back. But now it has been captured in the agenda. And that's very important. And I entirely agree with Ryan that you have to have a futuristic view rather than just lamenting on the present state of affairs. As both Mohit and Ryan said, that you have to look at the future and fix attainable goals. That 2025, I plan to reach here. 2030, I plan to reach here. This is what I take as my benchmark. And this is what I propose to do about it. That is very important. And look, in India, you have some of the most talented and hardworking judges. We all know them. You have some outstanding lawyers, solicitors, lawyers, arguing counsel, litigation, non-litigation. So the system is in place. What is required is putting the whole package in place. And for putting the package in place, you need the infrastructure, because as Mohit rightly said, that you will only invite investment if they feel that the system is such that once they want to pull out, they have the legal recourse to pull out and not get stuck for 10 years. The whole economy gets a different push once you have a judicial system which is in place. And that is where infrastructure becomes important. And I think that is where really, in addition to, of course, the idea of the NJIAI, you have to bring in and utilize this whole concept of virtual hearings, because virtual hearings, it cannot be overstated, liberate you from the brick and mortar infrastructure requirement. It does require an infrastructure of Wi-Fi's and of systems, but once you put them in place, you can, and once you have your records which are digitalized, of course, that will take time. There will be a lag. But once that happens, you can cut across a whole swathe of other issues and problems. And I think that is one area where we can focus and ensure that we proceed further towards, of course, the ultimate goal of being a first world economy with a first world judicial infrastructure. We have a first world the quality of first world judges and lawyers, but we don't have a quality, we have not put it together in place to make it a first world judicial system of judges and lawyers. That is what is missing.
Point well taken. I'll go to Mr. Mohit Saraf.
Tarun, before you go to Mohit, I wanted to ask him, because he's the only one of us who's actually sat. Mohit, you sat on the FICCI or CII, isn't it? You were in charge of the committee which gave all the suggestions, gave all the suggestions. When you studied this subject, what did you feel were the glaring inadequacies, the first 3 or 4, so to speak? Because you're the only one with actual experience on this panel in this.
It's actually the problem where you see is that everything gets concentrated with few people. And there is not a delegation. I think the problem here is that you have to delegate with control. And delegation does not happen. So administrative function, like what I was saying, the administrative function stays with the judiciary, the Chief Justice. Now, if it is delegated to an operating officer who comes from a business world, who understand that, you get a technology officer who knows how the case management system works, how the internal process of the court does. And the Chief Justice controls that officer, who in turn controls it. Like in law firms, we'll have a CEO to run it. So that is an important part, because if lawyers start doing it, they'll do a mess of it. And in my view, that is the same requirement. And the other issue which I found, which was very inadequate, if you look at it, is, Ryan, that on economic reforms, because really we'd all talked about $5 trillion. Economic reform, productivity comes and improves with infrastructure, and you need investment to grow your per capita. And therefore, the judiciary and the executive has to speak. They need to understand each other. They don't understand. I was speaking at the National Judicial Academy last week on infrastructure project, and I was trying to explain that how does a delay kills the project. And that's an important part. And in my view, if the judiciary and the legislature and the executive speak, and I gave a recommendation that the Chief Justice and the Prime Minister should have actually an open house session where they should debate economic policy. It doesn't mean that they will not have a right to turn down the policy on constitutional ground, but they debate, they understand. Like when the Specific Relief Act was amended for infrastructure project, I remember a lot of judges felt that it was totally wrong because it was against the common law principle. And I think what they sometimes missed appreciating was it was for a purpose, for a commercial purpose of growing productivity. And therefore, what is good for infrastructure may not be good for others. Like they said that you can't ask for injunction, stay order is prohibited, which can delay the infrastructure project. And you have to go for specific performance, not for LD. You remember, like you typically go to a specific relief act, you generally go for LDs. Specific performances are given in a very specific cases, but infrastructure is a reverse. So I would say these are very important issues which need to be brought in, which will basically make it a much more vibrant judiciary and which actually helps the economy to grow.
Point for a good set of points shared by Mr. Saraf. I'll go to Mr. Karanjawala. We saw ministers in this government saying that faster dispute resolution is essential to have a $5 trillion economy, because anybody who commits funds to this country, and if there is a dispute, he doesn't want his project to get stuck. He just wants to quickly resolve and move ahead. Secondly, is a problem that we have seen. There is a certain hesitation in businessmen to go to courts. Now I'm talking not the court process, but also physically, because even spending 6 hours gets to be a big problem the way the infrastructure is that these people are not used to. They work in a certain kind of office and environment, and even spending a few hours in a court can be troublesome. I have personally seen people commenting on that. Do you think so? A, faster resolution, and B, infrastructure, both needed for a $5 trillion economy?
Definitely. And it's not just a matter of getting a $5 trillion economy. That's one aspect of it. That's the economic fallout of a better judicial process. So more investment comes, the economy grows. But there's another fallout, which is that you said the Chief Justice is showing his exasperation.
Yes.
But no matter how exasperated the Chief Justice of India is, the ordinary litigant who has had to suffer the system will be 5 times more exasperated.
Yes.
So one of the advantages of expediting, streamlining, and getting the whole process in order is that exasperation that people feel with the system starts to go away. That money is at one part, $5 trillion, fantastic, and we all have to aim for it. But the other thing is, just take out some of the normal day-to-day ache and pain of the litigant. Just find ways to create a situation where he does not have a horribly unpleasant experience every time he goes to court. And find ways. You see, as you have more courts, as you have better infrastructure, as you have people coming in from video from different states and so on and so forth, even as on many of your shows, Tarun, and that, if you remember, we had said that even if you take away video for the process of hearing, at least keep the video system for the Zoom system for the process of the litigant being able to see what is happening. So that he doesn't have to physically land up in court every time to see that his lawyer is reached or not. He can just watch and say there he is or there he is not.
That's a good idea.
Yes, we discussed it on your show before, Tarun, as you recollect. So that's the thing, you have to find ways to make things easier, make the whole process of litigating, going to court easier and more pleasant. Otherwise, the Chief Justice, of course, is exasperated because he sees the pain of the people. But the pain of the people is 5 times more than any judge. Because, he sees it day to day. And the whole system has become such that even a lawyer today would think 5 times before going to court.
In fact, I may not comment, but one of our former Chief Justices said he will never go to court.
Most people won't. Because,
that shocked everybody, because when our former Chief Justice says that who will go to court, then everybody felt that. But I'll go to Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. Now, you argue for a lot of top corporate houses in the Supreme Court, sometimes at the Delhi High Court. You've been, in a sense, lucky because Delhi has much better infrastructure than other places in the country. But you also travel a lot abroad. Do you feel that we still have to make that leap to the 21st century as far as courts are concerned, even in Delhi for that matter?
Yeah, I think more than leap, we have to grow in small steps, because we have to, as I said, I remember once in a cricket match, somebody said, if you have to reach a team score of 400, you don't start thinking of 380. You start in the next 30 runs, next 20 runs, that's how you have to grow. You have to grow step by step. And that's what I think Ryan and Mohit were both hinting at. And I think one more aspect, which is very important to break this infrastructure logjam, if I may use that expression, is that there has to be an institutional space for communication of ideas between the political executive and the top echelons of judiciary. It need not be, Mohit use the word open house, need not go that far perhaps, because maybe I'm a little more conservative, but you have to have that institutional space where this conversation, this is very important, that conversation has to go on it breaks down many of the preconceived notions, and it ultimately greatly helps society, because a judge not only does judicial work, is also very important in the judicial scheme of things. So therefore, the political executive must understand where the shoe is pinching the judicial system and vice versa. Mohit gave that excellent example of sections 20A, B, C, etc. of the Specific Relief Act, because they were brought about with this realization that there has to be a green light to infrastructure projects without interference by court. So we have to examine, and we have to remember that court is not merely a source of interference. Court has to be, and is now becoming more and more, as an effective tool to ensuring that there's a proper flow rather than stopping the flow. I think that is very important.
Thanks so much for all these inputs, the 4-5 points shared by Mr. Saraf, interventions by Mr. Karanjawala, and all the inputs shared by Mr. Parag Tripathi. It was indeed good to hear that, and we were happy to see that for the first time, the Chief Justice of India is not only vocal, but is pushing for change. If he had not done so, nobody would have said anything. But the fact that he is doing so is, it has rekindled hopes that change is on the anvil. His successors as Chief Justice will only, as we hope, will take forward what he has initiated. The proposal has been initiated. Of course, the successor will take this forward, and we will keep track of it on Legally Speaking. Thank you so much, Mr. Karanjawala, Mr. Tripathi, and Mr. Mohit Saraf for joining me on this very important issue, which involves all of us. Thank you so very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.